Tonight on Bridge City News, we hear from our parliamentary reporter Ray Fillion, who gives his thoughts on the Gerald Butts testimony today if pressure was applied to former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould. The Lethbridge Hurricanes could wrap up a playoff spot with a win against Brandon tonight. BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly has a preview from the NMAC Centre. And Lethbridge firefighters will be camping on top of a roof for a great cause. We have the details. Thanks so much for joining us. There was apparently no pressure put on former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to order the Federal Prosecution Service to provide SNC-Lavalin a remediation agreement. Now that's according to the Prime Minister's former Principal Secretary, Gerald Butts. Butts spoke to the Commons Justice Committee earlier today. Ray Fillion is our parliamentary reporter who's been covering this story on the Hill. Ray, Butts says there was no undue pressure, but really, what is he supposed to say? He's not going to throw his lifelong friend Justin Trudeau under the bus.
No, obviously, we expected Mr. Butts to give a strong defense of the Prime Minister. Obviously, the two have known each other since their days at McGill University in Montreal back in the early 90s. He's a longtime friend of the Prime Minister's, a longtime companion as well, so that was to be expected. Mr. Butts didn't contradict what Jody Wilson-Raybould said, but he offered the committee a completely different interpretation of everything that went down over the past few months. Jody Wilson-Raybould a week ago during her testimony before the same committee, she said that she and her staff were hounded by people in the PMO and other government departments. They wanted her to intervene to keep SNC-Lavalin from having this criminal trial, which would have cost the company a hefty price. Gerald Butts, in his testimony earlier today, he said he did the math. He said that amounts to 2 meetings, 2 phone calls per month over a 4-month period. We cannot, says Gerald Butts, say that was undue pressure, inappropriate pressure on the former Attorney General.
Butts also said the cabinet shuffle had nothing to do with the SNC-Lavalin scandal?
It all had to do with Mr. Bryson's decision to leave politics suddenly in early January. He said that the Prime Minister didn't want to have a cabinet shuffle, but he was forced to have one because of Mr. Bryson's departure.
Did other MPs lay into Mr. Butts after he spoke to the Commons Justice Committee?
Not really. They're basically saying, look, we got two starkly different versions of the same events here. So what they want to do is ask Jody Wilson-Raybould to come back and testify yet again before the House of Commons Justice Committee. We don't know at this point if this is going to happen. But what we do know, Hal, is that Justin Trudeau wants to give his side of the story. He wants to say something publicly, whether at a news conference, a televised address, and in all likelihood, the Prime Minister is going to say something probably on Friday of this week, because the government is trying to put this whole scandal, this whole controversy behind itself as soon as possible. The House of Commons is on a break right now. They're coming back on the 18th of March, and that's going to be budget week. So they want people to focus on the budget when the House resumes.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me from Ottawa. In wake of the recent cabinet resignations of former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould and former Treasury Board President Jane Philpott, Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has her confidence.
It's a huge privilege for me to serve in this government, to serve as Foreign Minister for Canada. I have found him to be absolutely supportive. He is a feminist as a Prime Minister, and he's a feminist as a boss. Something that I have personally appreciated, which I think not all working mothers can say, is how unequivocally the Prime Minister has been supportive, for me personally, of the fact that I'm a mother.
Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has been demanding that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau step down in light of the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Many MPs with both the Tories and NDP want to see criminal charges brought up against the Liberals for obstruction of justice. Now, we asked on our Bridge City News poll if you thought the Liberals should be charged and if Trudeau should resign. Well, 88% of you said yes. The SNC-Lavalin affair won't be going away anytime soon, and we'll have more for you as the story develops. The lawyer representing the military's former second-in-command issued an ultimatum during a pretrial hearing this morning. Vice Admiral Mark Norman is charged with breach of trust for allegedly leaking government secrets to help a Quebec shipyard with a naval contract. Norman's lawyer is threatening to call the PM's former Principal Secretary Butts and Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick to testify in open court if they don't produce internal government documents. A government lawyer says the documents must first be reviewed before deciding if they should be released. An MLA in Calgary will not be seeking re-election. Karen McPherson says she's been battling anxiety and depression during her 4 years at the legislature. McPherson, who is the Alberta Party member for Calgary McKay-Nose Hill, says the demands of public life are just too much. McPherson was elected for the NDP in 2015, but left the caucus in 2017 and later joined the Alberta Party. She's one of 3 Alberta MLAs who are being counted on to help lead the party, which is hoping to be a big breakthrough in the spring election. Public health experts say one of the best ways to curb overdoses deaths is by establishing safe injection sites. These are places where people can use opioids under medical supervision and receive counseling. BCN's Loris Alexander speaks with staff at Arches and the impact they're having on Lethbridge 1 year after opening.
We are really at a turning point in terms of how we address drugs and addiction, but some places are pushing back with approaches that emphasize treatment, like this one.
So Arches has been operating in this community for over 30 years now. We provide a multitude of programs and resources for community members. We have housing supports, we have take-home naloxone kits and education. We have client services as well as nursing services. We have a drop-in clinic that people can access during the day. We also have an Indigenous recovery coaching program and other cultural supports.
Southern Alberta's opioid epidemic is claiming more lives than ever, often in public places. This is why Arches tried a radical new approach.
So in the last year that supervised consumption services have been operating in Lethbridge, we've had just over 167,000 visits in the site. This is 167,000 uses of drugs that would have happened in our community, whether that was out on the streets or in other areas in our community, that ended up happening in our facility under medical supervision.
Arches is a safe injection site where addicts can openly shoot opioids and other drugs under medical supervision.
So at supervised consumption services, along with the medical supervision, we also have addictions counselors on site 24 hours a day. We have registered nurses on site 24 hours a day. We have a multitude of wraparound services. In the last year, we've sent out over 8,000 referrals to other health and social services in community. We've provided just under 40,000 services on site here. Our end goal here with supervised consumption services is to keep people alive long enough to move them down the spectrum. So that's sending people to detox and to treatment. And so our goal here at Arches is to provide compassionate care for these community members who are accessing our services and move them down the spectrum.
A stark fact playing out in epidemic proportions. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Health officials in the United States have approved a medication related to the mind-altering drug ketamine as a new option for patients with severe depression.
But one of the things that happens when you're depressed is that the brain growth seems to slow and actually reverse. So the parts of the brain actually get smaller. And the longer you're depressed, the smaller those parts of the brain get. Ketamine seems to have the potential, as do other antidepressants, but it does it much more rapidly. It has the potential for reversing this brain growth deficiency and causing the brain to grow back towards the way it was.
February was the second coldest month in recorded history for Lethbridge. The average temperature last month was a bone-chilling minus 19.5 degrees, compared to a normal average of minus 6.1. This cold stretch has wreaked havoc on the city's infrastructure, causing a very high amount of water main breaks.
We've invested heavily into our water system to prevent failures from happening. But with this sustained low temperatures, we're getting record frost penetration in the ground, and it's having an adverse effect on areas of the city and water infrastructure that previously has been shown to be in relatively good condition, which has resulted in approximately 20 water main leaks over the past month of February and now entering into March. For this current decade, we would expect maybe 5 at most. Winter is always taxing on everything, but yeah, 20 is quite abnormal in terms of what we would expect in an average year.
Campbell says residents should also be watchful of waterline freezes that can occur due to deep frost penetration. If you're without water and it's not due to a water leak, it could also be frozen pipes on your property. The joy of owning a pet is immeasurable. And when accidents or illnesses happen, the pain is not just hard on you and your pet, but also on your wallet. Dr. Kate Lupton of Family Pet Hospital says pet insurance can really come in handy.
In general, most pet insurances are going to cover accidents and illnesses. There are some that you can get that will cover vaccinations, even some food in some cases. Obviously, you're going to be paying higher premiums per month for those sorts of things. Cats who develop urinary blockages are a very common emergency that we see, can be very costly because they often have to stay in hospital for a few days. Something like that would be covered if they had pet insurance before the illness. Things like surgeries for intestinal obstructions, so if a dog has eaten something they shouldn't and need to have it removed.
Dr. Kate adds the hospital has seen an increase of dogs high on marijuana ever since its legalization last October. She says those who partake should lock up the weed because dogs love the smell. The Lethbridge Fire Department is hoping for warmer weather by March 27th. Firefighters will be planning on camping atop of Hudson's Pub from the 27th to the 31st. With your donation, they're hoping to collect $10,000 in support of muscular dystrophy.
We've been raising money for them for years, and one of our members, his fiance was diagnosed recently with muscular dystrophy, and we thought we'd try to do a rooftop camp out and do it big this year. The last time we did a camp out, we waited till late March, and it was minus 25, I believe, and one of our members actually knocked over a propane bottle, not knowing that, and almost gassed himself. So I'm hoping it's warmer. We're pretty jealous of Edmonton. They raised over $100,000, so we are going to try to do our best to raise as much money as we can.
20 to 30 people will be helping with the event, and 5 firefighters will be participating in the campout. With the win tonight against the Brandon Wheat Kings, the Lethbridge Hurricanes will clinch a playoff spot. Tonight is the team's final homestand. Ainsley O'Reilly reports on one player who's getting hot just in time for the playoffs.
On Saturday, Jake Elmer's goal against the Regina Pats was his 12th consecutive. He's now the WHL's on-the-run player of the week.
A little bit of pressure to keep the streak alive, but most importantly, we're trying to win hockey games here. We're in the chase for first base in the division here, so we're trying to keep the race alive, and I think we're doing a good job at that.
His teammates are really noticing his surge in play.
Lots of his shots are finding the back of the net, so if we just get him the puck, and he'll score goals for us. So he's been really good for us lately, and he has been creating so many chances.
When he's playing good, our whole team's playing good, so it works out for us, and he's been on fire lately.
It kind of reminds me of Morrison last year in the playoffs and whatnot. It's, for whatever reason, at this time of year, some 20-year-olds really step up, and he's done a great job with that, and it's helped us win a lot of games for sure.
Elmer is 16th in WHL scoring, and head coach Brent Kissio is proud of his veterans' improvements.
He's been outstanding for us. He's been one of our best guys the last couple months. Consistently been good every night, playing hard, playing the right way. For us, he's always been real good on one-on-ones and beat guys, but sometimes he hasn't made the greatest decisions on when to do it and when not to, and I think that's really come around in his game. He knows when to move the puck now a little bit better, and when he's got to get pucks in deep, and when he can take advantage and beat guys on the outside.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
The province is building a new safety rest stop on the QE2 between Calgary and Edmonton. You'll also see 2 more being built along the Yellowhead Highway west of Edmonton. The government says the new rest stops are part of the overall approach to promote traffic safety. Transportation Minister Brian Mason says the cost will be $20 million and will create about 89 new jobs. He says safety rest stops will allow for future commercial opportunities such as gas stations and restaurants. 19 students were hurt after a school bus collided with a garbage truck in Indiana. State police say the crash occurred earlier today near the city of Aurora, which is located about 50 kilometers west of Cincinnati. An investigation into the crash continues. Samaritan's Purse is responding after tornadoes ripped through Alabama last Sunday, killing at least 23 people and leveling entire neighborhoods. More than 10,000 homes and businesses are still without power in the area. This is one of the deadliest storms to strike the state in many years.
I'm Edward Graham and I'm with Samaritan's Purse, and we're down here in Smith Station, Alabama. It's right outside of Opelika. Multiple houses. It looks like hundreds of houses have been hit. This tornado came right through, and just complete destructions of homes like you see right here behind me. Roofs all around me completely ripped off, trees down, power lines out. This place was hit hard. They're hurting, and their souls are hurting. They've lost about everything they've got, and they just need some help. And they need the help and love of people that are willing to come share Jesus Christ. But not just that, but to get in there and lift some of these trees off their houses, tarp their roofs, and get them back in there quickly so they can be living and get on with their lives again. But if you can, get on the website with SamaritansPurse.org, and you can look to volunteer and come down here. Again, if you're willing to tarp, cut trees, move branches, just some small tasks in order to get these homeowners back in, we'd appreciate your support and help.
Civilians continue to emerge today from Baghuz, Syria, the last shred of territory held by the Islamic State. Some defiant wives and children of the militants yelled their support of the terrorist group and screamed at journalists. One woman yelled, "Take a picture of the shoe is better than you." The civilians were at a receiving area set up in the desert where they were screened by U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Kelly Sullivan is the manager of Rocco's Diner in Mission, British Columbia. She says they are considering creating a new milkshake in actor Luke Perry's honor. The diner served as a set for the TV series Riverdale, in which Perry starred. Perry died on Monday at the age of 52 following a stroke.
2 years ago, Riverdale did their first season premiere. They filmed here their first pilot episode. We are thinking about making a milkshake for it. We're still working on it. We've got a lot of flavors, so we have a little bit of playroom. A lot of people travel quite a ways to come out to Rocco's, and then we've had a few people who it kind of sparked more of an interest for them to come out a little bit sooner than they were planning on to because of the passing. Just a nice place to kind of come and reminisce about him. He was a great actor, and a lot of people really followed him, so it's nice to come to a place that he actually came to and filmed at. Very disappointed that he's passed away. He was really, really young, and hopefully his friends and family are doing okay.
What a nice honor for Luke Perry, dying at the tender age of 52. A mostly cloudy day in the Windy City and cooler, but a warming trend is on the way. A full look at the weather forecast is coming up. We had lots of clouds again today and cool. Tonight, most of the clouds will clear, giving us a low near -18. Tomorrow, partly cloudy with a high near 2. Friday, mainly sunny with a high again near 2 degrees. Saturday, cooling off slightly as the mercury drops to 0. Sunday, lots of blue sky and sunshine and a high near +1. It'll feel like spring on Monday with a high near 10 degrees. Tuesday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 9. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 4 and an average low of -8. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1987 at 18 degrees, and the record low was -38 in 1951. Sunrise at 7:05, sunset at 6:20. Checking tomorrow's national forecast now, Vancouver will have periods of rain and a high of 5. Victoria will also have showers off and on and a high of 6. A good chance of flurries for Calgary on Thursday with a high of -6. Mainly sunny and -6 as well for Edmonton. Overcast and -11 for Regina tomorrow. Sunshine and -10 is on tap for Saskatoon. A few clouds and -10 as well for Winnipeg. Toronto will be mainly sunny and -5. Sunshine and -8 for Ottawa tomorrow. Montreal will have a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of -8 as well. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mainly cloudy and -8. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have flurries and -6. Charlottetown, PEI will be cloudy and -9. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect snow and a high near -5. China is blocking some imports of Canadian canola. Officials in Beijing says it's due to fears of insect infestation. Others believe it's just another move aimed at putting pressure on Canada to release the Huawei technology executive who is being held and awaiting extradition to the United States for fraud charges. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, says diplomatic tensions between Canada and China are getting worse, and now farmers may pay the price.
In the past, they've just tried to slow things down. Now they're blocking one of the largest exporters to China. This is an attempt to hit Canada economically where it hurts. And unfortunately, it's going to hit out your way in the prairies, more particularly Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but a little bit in Alberta as well.
Catch my full interview with Mr. Lilly discussing China and how our Prime Minister's popularity is plummeting in light of the SNC-Lavalin affair. That's coming up after business news. The Canadian Canola Growers Association has a new president. Bernie McLean, a Saskatchewan farmer, has been named to the job. He replaces Jack Froese of Manitoba, who served a 2-year term. Also new to the board are Hubert Beaudry of the Ontario Canola Growers Association and Andre Harp of Alberta Canola. The 10 board members represent canola organizations in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. It represents more than 43,000 canola farmers. Alberta Agriculture has tips for livestock producers whose animals dropped weight because of the cold weather this winter. Livestock experts say cattle, bison, and horses need up to 30% more feed when the temperature drops below -20. Cows in late pregnancy can be fed a certain amount of straw per day, but it cannot be the total increase in feed supplied because it's too low in protein. Experts recommend adding a kilogram of grain per head per day at -30 and just under 2 kilograms of additional grain at -40. An oilfield service company in Calgary says it is cutting its staff by 13%. Step Energy Services says the cuts are in addition to a 12% reduction in its field staff since October 1st. It is the latest oilfield services company to reduce its workforce as activity in the energy sector continues to slow. Last month, Trican Well Service said it cut 160 jobs and Encana slashed its workforce by 15%. The Bank of Canada left the key rate unchanged today. The bank held the rate steady at 1.75% for a third straight setting, citing an uncertainty in the economy. The central bank statement says the first half of this year is now on track to produce weaker numbers than 2 months ago. The bank says it has dropped language from its release, saying the prime lending rate should be between 2.5% and 3.5%. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has been demanding Prime Minister Justin Trudeau step down in light of the SNC-Lavalin affair. Many MPs with both the Tories and NDP want to see criminal charges brought up against the Liberals for obstruction of justice. We asked you on our Bridge City News poll if you thought the Liberals should be charged and if Justin Trudeau should resign. Well, 88% of you said yes. The latest poll numbers are out, which shows how the SNC-Lavalin scandal is impacting the Trudeau Liberals. BCN's contributor Brian Lilly has details for that poll next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Begin this Easter season with an opportunity to observe Ash Wednesday. Hosted by the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd in Lethbridge, an Ash Wednesday service is taking place tonight at 7 p.m. All are welcome. Empty Arms is a self-help group for families who've experienced miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, stillbirth, or neonatal death. Come and find support from those who understand what you're going through. This group meets the first Wednesday of every month from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the Family Center in the Lethbridge Center Mall. For more information, call the Family Center downtown at 403-320-4232. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help serve hot meals, assist with Foot Friday, and help sort incoming donations. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Another one of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's ministers has resigned. Treasury Board President Jane Philpott joins former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould and Trudeau's Principal Secretary Gerry Butts on the sidelines. Joining me now to discuss all things political is Brian Lilly, an award-winning political journalist in Toronto. Brian, is this the start of a mutiny? I hear the PM wants to bring things under control by demanding the remaining 33 ministers put out public statements supporting the Prime Minister.
Yeah, you could call it mutiny on the Rideau with Jane Philpott's resignation, joining Jody Wilson-Raybould. But how does this make things look better when the Prime Minister demands that you put out a statement defending him? He's had ministers fanning out across TV and radio stations all across the country saying, oh, he's a great man. Oh, it's a great government. Fully support him. They look like Catholic cardinals lining up to kiss the ring of the Pope, or maybe more appropriately there, Hal, they look like mafiosa lining up to kiss the ring of the Dawn. This is not a good look for the PM. I don't think that it puts the fire out. People are going to continue to speculate that MPs or cabinet ministers will resign. Look, MP Selina Cesar-Chavannes, she is from just outside Toronto. She said about a week ago that she wasn't going to run again. And at first, oh, no, it's not about this. Well, now she's putting out tweets that make it clear it's about this. Nathaniel Erskine Smith, who is close to downtown Toronto. He's the beaches area in Toronto. He's saying, I may not run again. It depends how this turns out. He's making it clear he's not happy about how this is working. Another backbench MP, Wayne Long from New Brunswick, is saying that he agrees with Jane Philpott that sometimes it costs you on principle, but there's a bigger cost if you don't act on your principle. So, this attempt by the PM to shut this thing down hasn't worked so far. I don't think it will work.
Canada's top civil servant is now facing calls to resign after being called partisan at his recent committee hearings. Tell me more about that.
Well, we talked about this a while ago, about Michael Wernick's bizarre appearance where he showed up and he talked about, I'm worried about the potential for political assassination. I'm worried about where my country is going. All these things that had nothing to do with the SNC-Lavalin scandal, with the allegation that the top officials inside the government, including himself, Michael Wernick, had put inappropriate pressure on the Attorney General to throw the investigation, to throw the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin on bribery and fraud charges. And then he tried to say that it wasn't unlawful pressure or undue pressure. Well, one of Michael Wernick's roles for the next election as the head of the non-partisan public service, right? He's not supposed to have a political bone in his body and how he operates. One of his roles is to oversee claims of fake news in the election, to oversee certain parts of enforcing the election law. And both New Democrats and Conservatives are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, you're defending this government like you're a minister. You're singing the praises of ministers as if you're part of the team. I mean, his full-throated defense of Carolyn Bennett as the best Minister of Indigenous Services he'd ever seen. My jaw hit the floor when I heard him say that. This is someone who was at the top of the what we used to call Indian and Northern Affairs during the Harper years. And I never heard him say anything positive about some very capable ministers on that file, including the late Jim Prentice, that cleared away a lot of land claims that had just been languishing for years beforehand. So yeah, there are now calls for Michael Wernick to step down. I have to say that I agree with them.
So what are the latest poll telling us about the SNC-Lavalin affair and how it's impacting the Liberals? Do Canadians believe former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould, or are they more siding with the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau?
Well, the latest poll that I've seen, and there's going to be more. Trust me, there's going to be more. And not a single one has been favorable to the government, either in terms of voter intention or who they believe. Ipsos is a little bit below Angus Reid in terms of believing Jody Wilson-Raybould over Justin Trudeau, but it's still 2-1, 67% versus 32%. And so this is, you're just looking at this and saying, Jerry Butt's testifying. What's he going to do? Is he going to change anybody's mind? People are already siding with the former Justice Minister against Justin Trudeau. And in terms of the popular vote, it's hurting the Liberals. It's hurting them big time. Ipsos has the Conservatives at 40% support nationally, in 68% in Alberta, over 50% in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. In Ontario, it's 40% Conservative, 31% Liberal, almost mirroring the national results. But I'll tell you something. How, everyone across the country has heard of the mythical 905 region that surrounds Toronto. You used to live in it. It's the ultimate swing area in the biggest political prize in the country. 20-point lead, according to Ipsos, in the 905 region. Now, margins are small, the margin of error is larger, but a 20-point lead for the Conservatives over the Liberals in one of the biggest, most vote-rich areas of the country. This is damaging Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. And one last data point from that Ipsos poll, because I can geek out. I can really geek out on data points from polls. When it comes to where women sit, and people have been talking about, are women being turned off by how Justin Trudeau has treated two top female cabinet ministers? 37% say they would vote for Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives. It's only 28% say they would vote for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. The Conservatives have an 8-point advantage. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are the ones picking up the support that Justin Trudeau's losing. And an awful lot of Liberals, here's my prediction, if this doesn't go away soon, they're just going to stay home next election. They won't go to the NDP or the Conservatives. They just won't show up for Justin Trudeau.
And a poll we put on our social media sites and our website asking if Canadians feel that PM should resign, so far 77% have said yes here in Alberta.
Well, even a lot of Liberals are now saying, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's not an insignificant number that say, yeah, the PM should resign until this is cleared away. An awful lot of Liberals saying, 73% of Liberals saying that the RCMP should be called in. And about 84% of Canadians say the RCMP needs to be called in to investigate. So the Liberal spin on this has been, this is a complex issue, Hal. Canadians can't possibly understand it. Oh, this is going to go away. No, Canadians are getting this, and they're not happy with what they're seeing.
Brian, our Prime Minister was heckled recently at a climate rally, and he canceled public appointments. What's this really telling Canadians?
Well, it's the hecklers, by the way, were not upset at what's been going on with Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. The Prime Minister was at a climate change rally because what he wanted to do on Monday of this week was he wanted to change the channel. And someone in his brain trust had the mistaken idea that holding a bunch of events about the carbon tax and about climate change would make Canadians, oh, there's a scandal with the government? What? I didn't hear about that. Let's talk about the carbon tax. And so we had Mark Garneau in Toronto. We had Catherine McKenna in Ottawa with climate change announcements. And he was holding a rally and he was going to meet this family to talk about how good the carbon tax is for you and your family and your budget. He had to cancel the meeting with the family, which was a photo op only. He canceled his events in Regina on Tuesday, which again were about climate change. At this climate rally on Monday night, he was heckled by anti-pipeline and far-left environmental protesters. It did not look good on him. He looked rattled. He left this rally. And if you haven't been to a Justin Trudeau event, the guy gets mobbed on the way in. He gets mobbed on the way out. My colleague, Joe Warmington, showed me video of Trudeau leaving. He walked out by himself. There was nobody there to cheer him on. There was nobody, hey, Justin, we love you. That's unusual, especially in Liberal heartland in Toronto. So, even that, the Liberals had trouble filling a venue that seats less than 1,000 people in the heart of Toronto. It wasn't out in the suburbs. The Danforth Music Hall, it's on the subway line. It's easy to get to. Couldn't get 1,000 people out.
At his recent climate rally, Trudeau said his economic plan is working. But Brian, the latest data from Stats Canada says otherwise.
Yeah, so I'm sitting there watching the PM's rally, as I'm sure you were, Hal, and he's talking. He's making all these statements. Again, as I said, he wanted to change the channel to climate change, but he talked about a few other things, and he said, our economic plan is working. And he can point to some data points that, including number of people lifted out of poverty and things like that, and he did. Except that just last Friday, what would have been major headline news had it not been for the fact that we're dealing with this huge scandal, Stats Canada said the economy barely grew, 0.1% growth. We are getting close to recession stage in terms of the economy, and it didn't even make headlines. So this is a government that has trouble on many fronts. You're not hearing about some of these other stories because of the size and the scope of this scandal. But the economy is slowing down. Compare that to the United States, where it's still going above expectations. And you have to wonder if some of that has to do with things like Bill C-69, which has been huge in Alberta, in which the Ford government here in Ontario has done a full court press on. Quebec, if they haven't already, they're about to come out against it. I know that Premier Notley flew all the way from Edmonton to appear before the Senate committee herself to denounce this bill. So there is a coalition of provinces across the political spectrum saying this bill's bad. It's going to kill off mining, oil and gas, forestry. It's going to hurt our economy in major ways. Prime Minister seems clueless to this and clueless to the fact that the economy is not doing as well as he would like us to believe.
Brian, China is upping the ante in its fight with the Trudeau government by blocking a major Canadian canola producer from exporting to China. Tell me more about that.
This is part of an ongoing fight. And I've talked to former Agriculture Minister Jerry Ritz about this several times. He was Stephen Harper's longtime Agriculture Minister under the Conservative government. China has not adapted canola. They're still using the old rapeseed oil, which is harsher, but they like to promote their own producers. And we moved away from rapeseed a long time ago because of those very same reasons. It doesn't taste as good. There's a bitterness to it. We developed canola. Canadian linoleic acid oil. We developed that, and it's fantastic. Best cooking oil going, as far as I'm concerned, along with olive oil. But China is constantly trying to push back. This latest one is being seen as a bit of retaliation, a bit related to the Huawei issue, because, of course, we just had this confirmed, a Canadian court saying that Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, an extradition process against her can proceed. So China has detained two Canadians. They've increased the penalty for drug smuggling on another one from 15 years to the death penalty. Okay, that didn't work. What are we going to do next? Let's block their agricultural shipments. In the past, they've just tried to slow things down. Now they're blocking one of the largest exporters to China. This is an attempt to hit Canada economically where it hurts. And unfortunately, it's going to hit out your way in the prairies, more particularly Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but a little bit in Alberta as well.
Brian, many farmers and producers across Canada are asking who this new agriculture minister is. It appears as though Marie-Claude Bibeau is kind of an unknown commodity.
Yeah, she tried to sell herself when she was appointed. I thought it was a bit of an odd appointment to agriculture minister. She doesn't have a background in agriculture. She replaces Lawrence MacAulay as ag minister. And, you know, when Lawrence MacAulay hosted his counterpart from the United States, whose name just slipped my mind there, they're both farmers. And MacAulay hosted him at his farm in Prince Edward Island. Now, does MacAulay have a big farm? Well, not by Alberta standards, not by prairie standards at all, but he's got a farm. And that was his line of work before he went into politics. Marie-Claude Bibeau said, well, I come from a dairy region of Quebec. She comes from the Eastern Township. She comes from an area that borders Vermont, Stansted, Derby line, most famous for the fact that the town library for both the Quebec side and the Vermont side cuts through town. And there's actually black tape. I've been there. There's black tape throughout the library telling you if you're in Canada or the US, depending on where you're standing. But she doesn't have there's dairy farmers there. I've driven past them. She doesn't have a background in it. And an awful lot of industry players are saying, we don't know who this is. We don't know who we're dealing with. We're a little bit concerned. I guess their only hopeful sign is we're less than a year away from an election and maybe she can't do that much damage. But whereas Lawrence MacAulay, they felt they had someone who at least understood them, maybe depending on who it was, they would disagree. They don't really think that Marie-Claude Bibeau actually understands their issues, which is someone that's covered the ag file for 15 years, not full time, but I've covered it. It can be complex. It's a combination of business and agriculture issues that are unique to that sector. And this minister has a lot of time or a lot of need to come up to speed. I don't know that she has enough time to come up to speed before we're into election mode.
Award-winning journalist Brian Lilly joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
Joining me now from Toronto is Murray Klippenstein, a prominent Toronto litigation lawyer. Now, Murray has joined a legal challenge mounted by the Canadian Constitution Foundation against the Law Society of Ontario. Welcome to BCN, Murray.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, some of our viewers may not be aware of the highly unusual requirement that the Law Society of Ontario is putting on its members. Can you explain?
Sure, and in doing so, I'll maybe give people an idea of why they should perhaps even listen to a lawyer, for starters, and a lawyer from Toronto, which is the events here at the Law Society level tend to spread in different provinces and across the country because the law societies talk to each other and sometimes follow each other. And the Law Society in Ontario is the biggest in Canada, with more than 50,000 lawyers that they regulate, and it's actually one of the biggest in the common law world. The Law Society makes rules for lawyers, and they're legally binding, so they're law. And what the Law Society has done fairly recently, a little over a year and a half, is pass a rule that every lawyer must adopt and abide by a statement of principles that requires us to do something. And for me, and actually a lot of other lawyers, to have somebody, especially the government, say, you have to adopt this statement of principles, we're going to tell you which are your principles, really flabbergasted me when I first read it, and still flabbergasts me. So one issue is they're telling me what I'm supposed to publicly say are my principles. My principles are mine, I always thought, and I still believe. And then they fill in the principles, and at first glance, what principles are sound very nice. It's supposed to be, we promote diversity and inclusion, and at first glance, those sound very good. But I can say more about that. But that's the basic issue here, which is the Law Society, I think, is basically telling me what I have to think, what I have to say, what I have to believe.
You know, this reminds me a lot of the attestation that the Liberal government put on its summer jobs grant program, that you have to agree with abortion, and if not, then you're not going to get the funding. So that ain't right, Murray.
Well, that's I see your analogy. This is even worse in my assessment, because it's telling me that these are my principles. I have to state them. I have to publicly state them. And so it's forcing words in my mouth.
Now, you say this has become politicized, a form of identity politics, ordering the legal profession to obey a set of these specific political ideologies. Is this really a condition of the license?
Yes, because the Law Society has the force of law. It tells us lawyers whether or not we get our license and whether or not we can practice. And so they made this requirement, the compulsory statement of principles, obligatory. They said they're going to enforce it. There will be compliance measures or punishment. And it's, my career is at stake, and of 50,000 lawyers. If we don't comply, the Law Society has been pretty vague and a little bit sneaky about how they're going to enforce it and when. But they said they will. And so when I first saw this, I spent a year, frankly, agonizing about it, because what am I going to do? I have a fork in the road. Either I obey or I don't. And if I don't, they're going to punish me. And eventually down the road, that means I will have to be disbarred by them unless something changes.
So what's the biggest issue you're taking with the ideology? Tell me a bit about that.
Well, as I said, I'm supposed to now promote diversity and inclusion. And I used to think those were good sounding words that I wouldn't want to or disagree with. But when you actually look at what people who propose and push for that say and do, which I spent about a year researching, I was stunned, because it seems to be that the word diversity, for example, is a bit of a mask and a bit of it hides a lot of things that come with it. And to pick one example, what the Law Society's report on this issue said is that one of their objectives, and that's their word, is for racialized, that's a funny word, comes out of sociology and very political, racialized members of the profession should now be represented to the same degree they are in the population in all workplaces at all levels of seniority in the same proportion. So when you actually look at that in detail, what that means is that in all workplaces in the profession, the objective is to basically have people hired and then promoted based on their skin color.
Now, is this requirement unconstitutional, Murray? Don't Canadians have the charter right to believe as they choose and to speak as they choose?
I think so. I thought so, and that's what I intend to do. But by making this something I have to sign on to as a statement of principles, I, don't have, I think, the right to express myself or to think about these issues. I think thinking about issues is very important. I mean, look at it from different points of view. People may say, thinking about things, I've got too much in my life. I got to put food on the table. I'm not doing well at my job. So what's this about freedom of expression? It doesn't matter. But I think it does matter for all of us to, for us to think about what we believe in, to express it or not. So I think it's very important. And when I look down the road on this, I said, I spent 20 years building a law firm that, to a large degree, was focused on access to justice and helping the disadvantaged. I said, I can't even do that anymore. I can't operate my firm for the next 10 years the way I thought I would, the way I planned. It was my vision, because I'm going to be in conflict with the Law Society. That'll harm my reputation with the clients, with other lawyers. People in the firm are going to, either disagree with me or don't want to be associated with it. And I'm going to be implementing someone else's political ideology in my law firm, and I don't want to do it. I think that's wrong, and I won't do it.
So on the equality side of this requirement, are law firms going to be mandated to have a certain percentage of racial and gender representation on their staff list?
Basically, yes. This all started out with a focus on helping racialized members of the profession, which I think is a great thing. And then it became very ideological. And then the Law Society, in a few minutes at a meeting, without thinking about it, added on that this would apply to all equality-seeking groups. And again, from where I come from, I was always a strong, and I still am a strong supporter of the idea of equality. But now there's this list. They didn't give us the list, but all other equality-seeking groups that the same thing applies to. So, you basically have in the profession all these compartments and boxes of basically quotas based on, frankly, the skin color you were born with, the sex chromosomes you were born with, or, you mentioned identity politics, any kind of sort of identity that you believe in that can't be questioned. And so I don't think that's good for the profession or for the public, for anybody. And, so that's just dealing with the ideology, which is separate from the idea of me being forced to say, as a matter of principle, that I support this.
So what has the response been like from other lawyers in the trenches? Are they good with the requirement, or do they have serious issue with it as well?
Well, for a long time, there was silence, because this is the Law Society with basically legal brute force saying, we're going to force you to do this. And most lawyers, like most other people, are very busy and hectic with their day-to-day lives and putting, as I said, food on the table and taking the kids to hockey and stuff. So most people, there was no talk about it. And the Law Society, I think this was a very cunning, I think. They made it so easy to comply and so hard to stand up against it. So all you have to do is check a box on the annual filing report, literally one click with the mouse, say, I comply, and then you're home free. And even though I think thousands of lawyers don't like this idea, very few speak up. And the Law Society has publicly said that something like 95% of lawyers have clicked the box. And in a way, that's scary. In a way, it's understandable. Who's going to, take a stand of principle on this if it costs you your career? And certainly for, a year, I said, Murray, you're nuts if you think you're going to resist this, because you lose your career, you'll lose your reputation, and you'll lose the vision you had for your firm. And why do it? You'd be insane to. But something I hate to sound all sort of, almost pompous about it, but something in my soul said, if you do this, you can't live with yourself. So I basically made a plan to wind down the law firm I'd spent 20 years building. So I can take a stand.
A man has to be able to sleep well at night. Is the Law Society going to enforce this requirement? Are they going to disbar members if they don't comply?
Well, excuse me, that's a funny thing. They said they would force compliance. I think that there's been now an increasing pushback from prominent lawyers, from many hundreds of lawyers. I don't know if they have the guts, or I'm going to say the integrity, to enforce it. It's a fiasco now. And there are still lots of lawyers who, frankly, and this puzzles me, maybe it's younger lawyers or diversity ideologues, they don't seem to really care about freedom of expression, freedom of thought. And so, what they're going to do is unclear. But by putting us in that position, basically by putting, I hate to say it, but a legal gun to our head, any lawyer, any person would say, well, why would I not comply? The cost of not complying is so high, and the cost of complying is just one click on the mouse. There are some really increasingly brave lawyers. There's now actually something like 20 or 22 lawyers who, all of us together, are running in the next bencher election on a matter of principle. But voter turnout in the Law Society elections is relatively low because most people just say, let the Law Society do their thing, and they're busy. So I don't know what's going to happen, but increasingly people are speaking up. And again, going back to where I started, I think that something like this will probably happen in the legal profession in Alberta. It's happening everywhere, and in schools, in government, in media, in political parties. If you say, wait a minute, I'm not prepared to just wholeheartedly say I support this thing called diversity, I think we should think about it. Of course, you're immediately branded a racist, a sexist, and so forth. And that's starting to happen with me from people who I think should know better. But that's a part of the price you pay.
So, Murray, could the Law Society's ideology have a major impact on certain types of lawyers? For example, if a lawyer fights for the right of a faith-based private school to not have a gay-straight alliance in their schools, is it possible these kinds of lawyers will simply lose their licenses?
Well, I don't think it's come to that in Alberta yet. I think that logically, that's probably where it could end up in Ontario right now. And I don't think the Law Society would have the guts, if I can use that word, to push it that far. But all it takes is somebody to file a complaint against a lawyer saying they're not respecting diversity. And then that process would grind it through. I mean, I don't think realistically it would happen. It would be a bit of an uproar, I would hope. But again, it's a fork in the road, and that's probably where one of those roads goes. And it's very intimidating and very scary. And going back to the start, I mean, I don't think we should be in this situation at all. I mean, with freedom to think and freedom to express yourself, freedom of conscience, freedom of belief. This is the wrong way to deal with. There are some issues, but this is the wrong way to deal with it.
Let's go back to what you were discussing earlier about how you and some of the lawyers are mounting an election campaign to become directors on the Law Society board in order to change things from the inside. When will this case actually go to court?
Well, you mentioned, and there's two things. One is the election, which happens in April, and then I'm also letting my name stand in the legal challenge. Now, the legal process is very slow, as you know, as folks know. So it could take years for that to be resolved. And there's usually a first level decision, then an appeal, perhaps another appeal. So it could take a long time. And one of the things about the legal process is that the courts generally have a rule that when a body like the Law Society or some other body that has legal authority to make decisions and is supposedly expert on, then the courts will take a bit of a hands-off position, and they don't want to interfere. So I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk. So it could be years. I mean, in the election coming up in April, as I say, there's a fair bit of apathy in the legal profession. And although I'm getting huge number of calls and emails from people who are silent about this and intimidated by the pressure, but who are very concerned and supportive.
It seems obvious that freedom of thought and speech is being violated here, but is any of this a guarantee of a legal victory for you?
No, I wish I could say it's clear and obvious, but it isn't. And I'm grateful for You mentioned the Canadian Constitution Foundation stepping in and supporting me in this, and my co-applicant, Professor Ryan Alford, and I have a good team leader and lawyers here, Asher Honigman. 2 years ago when I took this stand, among other things, I thought that if I took this stand, the Law Society would grind me down, eventually disbar me, and I wouldn't be able to defend myself because frankly, I can't afford a lawyer, not at these costs. And the Law Society would spend $1 million on a lawyer. And because of the political pressure, there's very few senior lawyers who would be willing to take a stand and defend this. I would hope so, but there's tremendous political pressure. As I say, if you express any doubt about this magical term called diversity, then people accuse you of racism, sexism, and whatnot.
Should be interesting to see how this plays out. Murray Klippenstein, Toronto litigation lawyer, thanks a lot for joining me today on BCN.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.